So, this video is going to be about our brain's happy chemicals. What are they and how to get them working for us. So when we think about happiness, we tend to think about the things that we do. We all know those things that we can do that make us feel happy. What we don't always think about is why. Well, actually, happiness is really a set of chemical responses in the brain. And happiness doesn't manifest in just one way. It comes in different ways. So we have four main happy chemicals that we produce in the brain: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And we can remember that as DOEs. It's an easy way to remember. And these chemicals, well, they will turn off and turn on of completion of certain tasks. So these chemicals are not on all of the time. The result of that is that we're not happy all of the time. But you know what? That's normal. We're not supposed to be happy all of the time, because if we were, from an evolutionary point of view, we'd never have any motivation to get off our bums and do anything. So actually the fact that we're not happy all the time is actually a really good thing. So thinking about the chemicals, how do they work? So I want to talk to you about the original primitive brain. So inside this fantastic brain of ours, we have the original primitive brain. When we were early man, it was the only part of the brain that we actually had. And that brain is all about survival, either good survival or bad survival. So things that are good for our survival or things that threaten us. And so what happens is our brain assesses the information and the experiences that we have. And so, for example, if something's bad for our survival, our brain remembers the experience and it remembers our responses, so that we can save all of this information, the sights, the sounds, the colours, the smells, the whole experience and all of our responses, and it saves them in our brain, in the hippocampus. And the reason we experience it as unpleasant is because we're alerted to it by the production of unhappy chemicals, if you like. Now, when something is good for our survival, then we also notice that, because we're encouraged, we're rewarded with a chemical in the brain, and then we're encouraged to repeat that experience. Now, when we repeat that experience often enough, we start to create neural pathways in the brain, and our brain starts to then be wired according to that experience. So our brains are a complete roadmap of all of our experiences that we've had in life, both good and bad. And actually we can use those experiences in life so that we don't have to think too hard. We can remember, and we can use, and we can learn and build and grow. We don't have to learn everything every single time. So let's talk about the chemicals. So the chemicals I want to explain to you, not in the order of DOEs, but actually in the order of least complex to most complex. So I'm going to begin with endorphins. Now, most of you will have heard of endorphins. We produce endorphins when we exercise. Also, we think. It's not strictly accurate. We create endorphins when we push ourselves further than we did before. So when we experience the discomfort of pushing our bodies further, then we produce endorphins. And endorphins originally were there to mask pain. So actually, they give us a bit of a high that masks pain. And when the pain wears off, we're left with the high. So you can get, I think endorphins are often called the runner's high. And yeah, runners will get it, but only if they push themselves further. And in terms of evolution, it's not a bad thing to be pushed further, because then you can increase your agility, your fitness. And in terms of survival, the simple result of that means that you're much more likely to survive if you can run farther and faster, than you could, originally. But you also get endorphins from laughing as well, and also from crying, interestingly. So endorphins are the most reliable happy chemical, if you like, and the least complicated. Then oxytocin, well, this is my personal fave. It's often known as the love drug, and that's because it produces those warm, fuzzy feelings that we get when we're experiencing closeness with someone, or actually with our pets as well. It's not just, you know, saved for human interactions. So we get it from physical contact, from hugging, from cuddling, from petting an animal. And oxytocin we also get from positive social interactions. So, you know, being friends and sharing our experiences builds closeness, builds social bonds, and it builds trust and empathy with each other and makes us feel good. But it also makes us feel calm and safe. And the interesting side effect of oxytocin is that it actually boosts our immune system and helps us fight stress. And the lovely thing about oxytocin is that it's a two-way process. So if you're hugging or cuddling someone or interacting with someone and you're feeling good, then actually the recipient will also be feeling good. So it's a lovely kind of reciprocal way of making yourself feel great. The next one, serotonin. Well, serotonin is also another social chemical, but it's slightly different from oxytocin. So this one is more about the chemical response that we get when we are feeling valued, when we're feeling important, or when we accomplish something and we feel we have some sort of like advantage. So if you get a promotion and you're recognised as being sort of successful in some way, then you're going to get that feeling of serotonin. The downside of serotonin is that it can be fleeting, because if you think about social recognition, you know, like actors winning a BAFTA, yeah, they'll have a huge flow of serotonin for a short while, but then it wears off. So then you have to go make another film, win another BAFTA to get the same hit of serotonin. Serotonin is also produced when we're in daylight. So actually, if you want to feel good, go and stand outside in the sunlight and it will help. And 80% of our serotonin is actually produced in the gut. So it's very much influenced by consumption, which is why you hear the term hangry. If you haven't eaten enough, you haven't got enough serotonin, and then you're going to start to feel angry. So actually there's a real link to the gut with serotonin as well. And certain foods can produce more serotonin than others. So bananas, for example, are really great for serotonin production. The trouble with serotonin is, you know, if you need to feel important, a good way to do it, it's better to look at your own accomplishments and recognise your own self-worth rather than comparing yourself to others. So if you're relying on winning something or getting that promotion as a way of feeling good, then sometimes you are going to have to accept that you will be disappointed. So better to get that serotonin from recognising an achievement that you've done for yourself, a task you've completed, or something else, or some other thing that you've managed to do. And the lovely thing about serotonin is that when you have got a lovely supply running through your system, it makes you feel brave, makes you feel calm, it makes you feel happy, and surprisingly, it even makes you feel less pain. And that's because serotonin acts as a pain blocker at your pain gate in the back of your neck. So often people who suffer with chronic pain will be given antidepressants, and that's because antidepressants stop your body from reabsorbing serotonin back into the system, so it lives longer. So you feel the effects of serotonin for a greater length of time. And so if you're suffering with pain, serotonin will block the pain for longer. So that's how serotonin works. And now I've saved the last chemical, which is dopamine, till the end, because it's slightly more complicated. So dopamine, it's linked to a reward for activity. So if you think about achieving something, say you're getting married and you're planning that big day, so you will get dopamine for all of the little tasks that you complete along the way in order to achieve your big day the way that you want it. So You get dopamine for little milestones and little tasks completed, and also for the end game as well. So you get a massive hit on the day. The day after, though, it crashes. That's because you've completed the task, and that's when dopamine ends. So dopamine doesn't flow all of the time. You have to work to get it. We also get dopamine for the anticipation of success, and we get it for pleasurable experiences. And that's where it starts to get a bit interesting. Now, I want to go back to early man at this point. So if you think about early man, everything in life was hard for early man. So early man had to go off and hunt in order to survive. They had to go find the food, learn how to kill the food, cook the food, and then eat the food in order to get the reward. So you couldn't just pop over to Lidl and buy yourself a microwavable dinner. Job done. No, it was a lot harder. So in order to keep you motivated, dopamine was your chemical reward, if you like. So dopamine is very much associated with the chemical reward centre of the brain, the reward centre of the brain. Now, as I said, primitive man had to, work really hard in order to get their dopamine fix. And this is the way that our brains are wired. So what happens is, how dopamine works is it's produced when we experience pleasure, and this links memory to motivation, because when dopamine is released, it causes your brain to really focus its attention on the experience, so that you're left with a stronger memory of the pleasure and the desire to repeat it. So in other words, you make that memory more vivid, you imprint it in the brain, and then you have this desire to repeat that experience again. So the reward of feeding your tribe, for example, is imprinted on your brain as being good, and then you're rewarded to repeat that experience because you want to feel that pleasure again. Now, as I said, early man had to work hard to get their dopamine hits. But in modern life, there are many stimuluses or stimuli that can produce dopamine really quite quickly. So things like certain foods can produce dopamine really easily. So chocolate, for example, it's high in sugar. So sugary, fatty foods produce a lot of dopamine quite quickly. And that's because in nature, fatty, sugary foods are incredibly rare, so you get the most amazing dopamine hit. But alcohol can also produce that dopamine hit, and this is where the trouble starts to begin, because substances that produce that intense and really quick response in producing dopamine, they're registered as those wow moments, and so they're the substances or the activities that can lead us to become addicted. So not everything that gives us pleasure will be addictive, but certain things that produce dopamine quickly and intensely are more likely to, if you repeat them over and over again. So how does this work? So it works because, say you don't have much dopamine in your brain and you're not feeling terribly motivated. So, maybe you don't have much of a connection with people in your life, or maybe your job isn't making you feel terribly satisfied, or maybe you just feel isolated or alone. So what do? You're feeling alone, you drink alcohol, you get the dopamine hit, you feel better. Your brain remembers that, so it encourages you to do it again. So then you drink more alcohol, you produce more dopamine, and what happens is the more you do it, the more dopamine you produce, the more the reward part of your brain starts to feel overwhelmed, because our brains are not designed to produce loads and loads of dopamine that quickly. So how does the brain manage it? Well, it does two things. It decreases the dopamine production, and it also reduces our dopamine receptors. So what that actually means is you have to do more of the same thing in order to get the same hit that you did originally. So whereas, say, 3 glasses of alcohol made you feel really great, 3 glasses you've become tolerant to. So now you have to do more of it to get the same hit. So therefore, after a period of time, you're working even harder, drinking even more just to get the same high, just to feel that level of pleasure that you did before. Then what happens is our brain remembers the experience as being great, so we start to crave the experience, and our cravings then take over. So even when the experience itself no longer really works as feeling particularly pleasurable because we've done it so often, the craving has more power on us. And that's where the difficulty lies, because, you know, our brain will then, the cortex will be overwhelmed by our primitive brain. It has a stronger pull, and it encourages us to change our behaviours so that we can satisfy that need of pleasure. And it can even lead us down the avenue of doing things that we know are wrong. So for example, you know, stealing money in order to get money to pay for drugs, you know, or if you've got, say, you know, you become addicted to sex, well, extramarital affairs in order to satisfy that need. So this is what happens when dopamine starts to, we produce a dopamine connection in the brain that isn't overly helpful. But as I said, most things that we do are not addictive in the way that, say, alcohol, gambling, sex, or certain substances are. So if we're thinking about creating happiness, often we need to find ways of making ourselves happy. Now, any new habit that we want to create in our later life takes about 45 days. So for 45 days, when we're trying to do something new, so say we're trying to replace eating chocolate with exercise, it's going to feel really difficult to start with because we're not doing the thing that brought the pleasure. And if we're not feeling pleasure, the brain then starts to think that we're under some sort of survival threat. So it'll even discouraging you from doing the thing that's actually going to benefit you in the long term. This is the primitive brain, remember. It's very black and white, and it's not terribly clever. It's got the intellect of, you know, about a 5-year-old. So it's either good or bad, as I said. So when you're starting a new habit, it can feel incredibly uncomfortable, and you can be going against your brain telling you, don't do this, go back to doing what you did before, because at least then you're going to be safe. So you have to go through that uncomfortable experience. But know that after 45 days, those uncomfortable feelings wear off, and then it starts to feel much, much better, even good, the more you do it. So the other thing to think about, if you want to find ways of being happy, is don't rely on the thing that you're good at. Don't just stick with that. Our brain has got 4 chemicals, 4 different ways of feeling happy. So we need to use all of our four chemicals and find lots of ways of making us feel happy, because, you know, life has its ups and downs, and if we're putting all our eggs in one basket, if something goes wrong, you know, in that one area, then we've lost our complete supply of happiness, if you like. So be inventive as well. Our brain loves novelty. Don't just keep doing the same thing, but find different ways of doing the same thing. So for example, you know, dopamine, if you're a gamer and you like playing games, you're never going to get the same dopamine hit from achieving the same level on a game that you've already achieved before. You have to go further. So your brain likes the novelty of building on what you can do and going further with it. So mix and match, have a pick and mix of ways that you can create happiness. You know, expect your habits to take time to build. And just, if you're not feeling happy all of the time, that's okay. It's kind of normal. So, you know, have a little bit of fun with it, experiment with it, and see, you know, see what you can do to, you know, promote the stimulation of those happy chemicals in the brain. So if you found this video helpful, please do give me a like, do subscribe, and I hope that helped. There'll be more videos coming soon.